Hello friends, today I will take the discussion of test number 10. We had to discontinue the discussions for two reasons. First was prelims was approaching and I didn't want students to feel overburdened. The second was I wanted to discuss these discussions, to go for these discussions in the offline class for greater effectiveness. Now, prelims has been postponed, so this is the time when you should not be just devoting entirely yourself for the prelims preparation. You should also start preparation of mains to break the monotony of the preparation also, because you all have been in prelims preparation since last November onwards, and at this point of time, if we will consolidate our mains, we will be in a huge advantage. Now, the next thing is that we start our crash course after prelims. But I feel that because of the time available, we can start the crash course from now onwards. I will inform by mail the exact date, and because there is a some sort of anxiety with respect to paper 2 and comparative politics, I will start my crash course from comparative politics paper 2. Then the second, students have an anxiety on Indian section, primarily because of the dynamic nature and open-ended boundaries. So after comparative politics and international relations, I will pick up the Indian section in the crash course. So I feel that any student, see, in a way we are fortunate that we have got so much time to prepare for the exams, and hence what I feel that यही दे दो hence what I feel that the expectations of UPSC will also increase, and most of you have finished your courses in the June batch, and since then lot of change has also happened in the world order, in the politics and in the relations. Lot of development has also happened, so we have to update ourselves. Yesterday, I have made one video on the upcoming test series for the students who have joined my regular class on in this November batch. If you want, you can also have a look on it. And the students who have enrolled in the October test series, and those who have completed their 17 tests, if they want to go for extra tests, you can renew the subscription with a marginal amount of 8,000 on the website if you want to give 17 more tests. Ultimately, in mains, what matters is answer writing. How do you develop the answer writing? Answer writing is a skill, and by practice makes man perfect. So by practicing more and more, you yourself develop how to write the answers. So two things I want to make it clear. We are, first of all, I would be I would be finishing the pending test discussions as early as possible. Second thing is, I will be starting crash course from now itself rather than starting from the prelims, because the time is less. There will be lot of development in, even in general studies, and you may feel overburdened. And the third thing is, your comprehensive tests will be resumed after prelims, because then only it makes sense. Now, you should focus even on mains also. This crash course is going to help you in a big way in the development of your answer writing skill and the value addition of your notes. I have launched another test series for the students who were in the November batch, and anybody of you who wants to write some more tests, you can have a look on the new schedule, and the students who have already paid fees for the October test, they can avail writing the additional tests at the fees of 8,000 rupees. You can check on the website. We will also be sending you the mail. Anyway, crash course was a part of this test series program, so I will be starting the crash course. Okay, so today I will resume the discussion and I will discuss test number 10. Now the question was, explain the meaning of judicial activism. To what extent it can be said that India had many activist presidents. Fine. So you may find this question little bit unusual. So actually I acknowledge and I apologize on behalf of the entire team for misprinting this question, and the question should have been ideally the meaning of presidential activism and to what extent India had many activist president. Even the answers that have been provided to you have been written judicial activism and presidential activism, so that the students who are not watching the video, they don't get confused, but the real question was presidential activism. Fine. So I will modify this question in the form of presidential activism and how many activist presidents India had. So the question printed is, what is judicial activism? And most of my students know what is judicial activism. So I will do is, what is presidential activism? How many, next, activism, to what extent it is appropriate to say that India had many activist presidents. Fine. So, what is the requirement of this question? This question expects whether you understand the concept of presidential activism, whether you understand it or not, and second, you should have an examples to show an activist president. But in this question, what do you think? What does the conclusion of the question should be? Okay, so in these type of questions, they are asking presidential activism. You may think they are asking something factual, but it is analytical. Then India had an activist president. Such question, what should be the sum up? So basically, in the conclusion, you should be writing your approach, that should there be presidential activism or should not there be presidential activism. So in Indian polity questions, If you will put the relevant cases, judgments, as well as examples, articles, then that answer will be holistic answer. Now normally the problem is how to start an answer. How to start this answer? What is presidential activism? Should we start presidential activism in Indian context will be when president acts according to his discretion. No, in the questions of Indian government and politics, you should always start with the form of the government India has, because presidential activism is there, presidential activism is desirable or not, can be understood only in the context of the form of government that we have. Fine. So how will I start this question? What is presidential activism? I will start this question with the form of government India has. This will be my first point. And in the form of government of India, what will be my focus to explain? I will explain the nature of the institution of president. Fine. Now to substantiate the nature of the institution of president, I will refer 74th, Article 74th after 42nd Amendment Act, and then I will write the examples which substantiate that India had a activist president, and then I will go for conclusion. Conclusion should be based on like whether activist president is desirable or not. The parameter will be the form of government. India has a form of government, whether that permits an activist president or not. This is going to be the general framework of our answer. Right? So how are you going to start? I will suggest you should have your registers and the pens ready, and you can take down the notes. Fine. So first of all, I will start that India is a parliamentary form of government. Second line, in a parliamentary form of government, there are two heads. One, the real head, and the other is the nominal head. Then I will take the example from Britain. For example, Queen in Britain represent the nominal head, and Prime Minister or Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister has the real power. The real power lies with the Prime Minister because he is the leader of the ruling party in Parliament, and the parliamentary system is based on the accountability of the Council of Ministers towards Parliament. This is how I will explain the form of the government. Now, to say my idea completely, I have to tell why there are two heads in a parliamentary system. Fine. So, write further that in parliamentary system there are two heads. The logic behind having the nominal head is to provide continuity in the administration. Parliamentary system is inherently stable and the government may go if it loses the vote of confidence. And another reason is since Prime Minister represent the party which has a majority, his institution is partisan institutions. He cannot be considered above party. So, a neutral head representing the views across the parties and who can symbolize the nation is also required. So, give rationale for the post of president in a parliamentary setup. Okay, so now I will repeat the entire thing that in a parliamentary form of government there are two heads, the real and the nominal. The president is the nominal head and the prime minister is the real head. The rationale behind having the two heads is the prime minister is political in nature. He is the head of the ruling party. Hence, for the purpose of legitimacy of the government, there has to be a head which can be considered as above the party head, above party politics, who can represent the nation and at the same time who can provide continuity in the administration because parliamentary form of government is inherently unstable as the government can lose if the parliament pass a vote of no confidence or a motion of no confidence just by simple majority. Okay, now you have to go further deep into the nature of the institution of president. Fine. So in a parliamentary system, president enjoys the nominal powers. If we compare with the Britain, in Britain the queen is called as the golden zero. Now, you should give reference to Article 74. The nature of the institution of president has been not just a matter of the legal debates, it has also been a matter of political debates. Supreme Court in Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab and Ram Javaya versus State of Punjab has explained that the nature of the president and the governors in Indian political setup is that of the constitutional head. Now explain what is constitutional head. By constitutional head it means these are the positions of dignity. Now you can always mention about that initially there was a confusion with respect to the nature of the institution, because before 42nd Amendment Act, it was written that President will act on the advice of Council of Ministers. In Article 74, the term will gives the impression as if Indian President has been given some sort of discretionary power. This controversy was put to an end by 42nd Amendment Act when the word will was replaced by the word shall. Now it means that it is binding on President to act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. So what you have understood in my discussion, that I should go for more extensive analysis of the form of government India has. Okay, and then you can write further, right, that if we look at the 42nd Amendment Act, it reduces the discretionary power of President and it brings the institution quite near to the institution of monarchy in Britain. However, 44th Amendment Act has restored the partial discretionary power with the President, in the sense that President can send the advice back but once. However, if the Council of Ministers sent the advice back, President has to give his assent. Okay. After this, you can just add a sort of an explanation to Article 44, and what you can write that on surface 44th Amendment Act appears to be democratic, but if we go by the theory of parliamentary form of government, 44th Amendment restoring the discretionary power adds to the uncertainty and adds to the confusion in the nature of the institution. Anyway, it is expected that President acts according to the conventions of parliamentary form of government. President should ordinarily accept the aid and advice. President is not seen in our constitution as an institution of accountability. The accountability of executive is to be held by the members of parliament, and in turn member of parliament are accountable to the electorate. Okay, so explain very clearly and give this impression to the examiner that you have a depth of understanding of the parliamentary form of government. Okay. Now I have to describe presidential activism. Fine. And always whenever you start with the next idea, change your paragraph. I have seen students do not paying attention on the presentation. So change paragraph. Explain presidential activism. Okay. So presidential activism in a parliamentary setup like India can be considered as a situation where president asserts its discretionary power and does not act according to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers actually represent the party which controls the parliament. So, through the Council of Ministers, the views of Parliament are expressed, and through the Parliament, the views of the people of India are expressed, and President should be respecting the views of the people, parliamentarians, and the Council of Ministers by adhering to the advice, and it is none of the business of the president to hold the prime minister accountable. Okay, though the constitution makes a provision under article 78 where it highlights the duties of the prime minister to communicate the administrative matters to the president and to provide the necessary information needed by the president. Now, in Indian context, the presidential activism will be a situation where president is acting on his own discretion. India has a long history of activist president. For example, and if you want to quote a scholar here, you can quote James Manner. Fine. So if you want to quote a scholar here, you can quote James Manner. So James Manner has explained that India has a long list of activist president. The very first president, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, was an activist, right? Activist in what sense? Rajendra Prasad has tried to assert his discretion over the Hindu Code Bill. After Rajendra Prasad, we can give the reference of Dr. Gyani Jail Singh. Jail Singh has used his pocket veto on the government's bill with respect to postal service with the post offices. Though the constitution does not put any limitation on the pocket veto, but the presidents are expected to respect the conventions of the parliamentary system and not to assert their veto. One of the most activist president has been President K.R. Narayanan, and President K.R. Narayanan has asserted his discretion on number of occasions. For example, point number 1, when he insisted on reading his own speech during the visit of US President Clinton, when he insisted on giving an interview rather than reading the speech, and he has sent the recommendations for imposing the president's rule in Bihar and UP twice. Means twice he has sent the recommendation for imposition of Article 356, first in case of UP, second in case of Bihar. This is enough to show that he can be considered as one of the most activist presidents. In some way, former President Pranab Mukherjee can also be termed as activist, but not to an considerable sense, because on number of occasions he has expressed his opinion about the state of governance, which seems to be in contradiction with the Prime Minister. So after these examples, you have to write the analysis of it. Okay? So now you should show that you understand the politics. So you can say that if we see the trend, with the exception of Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the situation of presidential activism arises either when the Prime Minister does not fulfill his constitutional obligation. For example, in case of Jail Singh and Rajiv Gandhi dispute, where Jail Singh held that Rajiv Gandhi was not providing the necessary information. In rest of the cases, the situation arises in the state of cohabitation. You can add another example, the example of APJ Abdul Kalam sending the bill, Office of Profit bill, back for reconsideration. Okay, and you can say that presidential activism has been seen in the state of cohabitation. Okay, now you underline cohabitation, and you can say that cohabitation is otherwise a feature of the French presidential system, where the president may be from a different party and the prime minister may be from a different party, and in the state of cohabitation, the type of an harmony and the type of a relationship which exists between the president and the prime minister when they are from the same party does not exist, and more frictions come in the governance. Similarly, in India, it has been seen that presidential activism appears when president is from the different party and the prime minister is from the different party. Okay, for example, presidential activism when it was K.R. Narayanan, he was a president, he belonged to the Congress party. That time Vajpayee was a prime minister who belonged to BJP. Again, when Pranab Mukherjee, similarly when APJ Abdul Kalam, he was a candidate supported by BJP, and that time the Prime Minister was Manmohan Singh. Similarly, Pranab Mukherjee from Congress and Modi from BJP. Fine. So this is how you can explain. And then you have to give your own judgment whether presidential activism is desirable or not. Fine. So you can write the conclusion. At times, scholars have justified the presidential activism. For example, they suggest that presidential activism has helped in restoring the federation, in preventing the misuse of Article 356. But if we go from the perspective of the legal experts, presidential activism is not desirable in a parliamentary form of government. And according to James Manner, presidential activism and judicial activism should not be taken at par. Constitution sanctions judicial activism, whereas Constitution does not talk about presidential activism. President is not an institution to hold the government accountable. Government is right or government is wrong. The ultimate responsibility lies with the members of parliament, who are ultimately accountable to the people or to the electorate. And in the end, try to use Ambedkar's position that according to Ambedkar, all dignitaries, the members of parliament, political parties, they should understand the constitutional morality. The success of the constitution depends on the extent to which the constitutional heads representing the institutions, they observe the mandate of the constitution. Fine. So it is expected that president should not be using his discretion, and in a situation he has to use discretion. For example, in case of hung parliament, he should try to develop strong conventions, and he should exercise his discretion in a way that it should not appear arbitrary from any point of view. Okay, so though the question was to what extent it is correct to say that India had an activist president, but your conclusion will be based on your understanding of whether presidential activism is desirable or not. Okay, so now let me take up the second question. The second question is, what is the difference between judicial activism and judicial overreach? It is said that Supreme Court is facing the crisis of credibility. Do you agree? Substantiate your point of view. Fine. So what is the question? The question is what is a difference between judicial activism and judicial overreach? This is first part of the question. Second, it is said that Supreme Court is passing through the crisis of credibility. Do you agree? Now, whenever questions like Supreme Court passing through the crisis of credibility and do you agree, It's a dangerous type of a question, and ideally you should be very alert and very diplomatically answer this question. Don't answer this question as a some human right activist or some member of PUCL or other movements. Do you agree? Substantiate your point of view. Fine. So I have to explain what is the core demand of this question. The core demand of this question is I have to explain the difference between judicial activism and judicial reach. Then I have to give arguments with respect to crisis of credibility, and I should have some substantive examples to prove that. Okay. So the first challenge is to explain the difference between judicial activism and judicial overreach. How will I come to this difference? Judicial activism and judicial overreach. Should I start writing judicial activism from the very beginning, or should I go little bit in the introduction? So I will not start directly what is judicial activism. I will create an environment. I will create a mental conditioning. Judicial activism, if you write directly, then you are not writing judicial activism in a perspective. Okay, and we have to write judicial activism or any concept in an abstract stand-alone manner doesn't make the statement, and your answer should be like a story. A person should start and should feel like reading till the end. So you have to weave your ideas, you have to condition your the mind of the reader. So more than information plays a role, but a good answer writing is also a psychological process. You should never exclude that. Fine. So that is the reason I will not go for an abrupt understanding, because then my answer will appear very disjointed answer. So I will first start with the role of judiciary. I will write one or two sentences on its highness. Next, I will write something about Indian judiciary. Then I will write about judicial activism and its effect. Then how judicial activism and judicial overreach will be there, and then the crisis of credibility. Okay, so the structure will be, I will not go abrupt, I will create a conditioning or an environment so that you can understand these things in a perspective. So I will explain the position of judiciary in democratic setup. Okay. Then first, so you should always be moving from general to particular. Fine. So first in general. Next, I will explain the position of judiciary in Indian context. So in Indian context, Pandit Nehru calls Indian judiciary as an activist judiciary. After that, I will explain judicial activism in broad sense, that with the growth of the consciousness of the human rights, the growth of the consciousness about the good governance, we see the judicial activism growing around the world. And Indian judiciary is not isolated from the world events. So from 70s and 80s, we see the setting in of the process of judicial activism. Fine. So we will give the background, historical background. We will also give some examples of judicial activism. Fine. And then we will analyze the difference between judicial activism and judicial overreach. So at times, activism has been seen as overreach, and primarily the political class would be more tempted to describe judicial activism as a judicial overreach. Now, the question is on the crisis of credibility, but you will not leave judicial activism abruptly. Neither you will start the answer out of context and out of perspective, nor you will end a part of an answer in just an abstract manner. Okay, you will have to conclude it coolly, patiently, and properly. So you can say that judicial activism is a new normal. It is considered now a part and parcel of a democratic political system, is strengthening the rule of law, is strengthening the rights of the vulnerable section. And then you can also write about how scholars like Upendra Bakshi, they praise the role of Indian judiciary. Then you say, come to this second part of the question, that is Indian judiciary going through the crisis of credibility. Right? So, and is this the first occasion it is going through the crisis of credibility? Now, when you have to explain the crisis of credibility, you have to actually explain what do you mean, how do you explain, how do you understand the crisis of credibility. You cannot straight away write the crisis of credibility without showing that you also understand the crisis of credibility. Fine. The crisis of credibility, you have to decide the parameters. The parameters will be independence of judiciary. It should not have, there should be no politicization of judiciary. You cannot have committed judiciary. In a country like India, you cannot have committed judiciary. So, if judiciary is not independent, will it be considered as credible? No. The second thing is efficiency and effectiveness. In terms of judiciary's main work, the case load, how efficient it is in performing its the task. Justice delayed is a justice denied. So in efficiency you can also add the quality of judgments. Then transparency, issue of corruption, misconduct of the judges. These are the things which will provide you the parameter to judge the credibility. Independence of judiciary or Indian judiciary is turning ideological. People give examples of certain judgments. Fine. Again, certain judgments you can take. For example, the crisis of credibility starts with the national anthem judgment, with the Supreme Court's approach towards the abrogation of Article 370. Okay, and then you can also the way Supreme Court has handled the case of the sexual harassment, the allegation against the former CJI. So that brings down the crisis of credibility. Okay, the another thing is you can talk about the huge case load that is there. Justice delayed is justice denied. Then the problem of corruption, especially at the level of subordinate judiciary. And though you, this is how you will substantiate that yes, to large extent it is going through the crisis of credibility, but try to smoothen it. And you can say at the same time there is a silver lining when we see the revolutionary judgments like Navtej Singh Johar case, like Sabrimala case, like final judgment on the final resolution of the Ayodhya dispute. Okay, and then how will you end this type of a question? You have to end this type of a question that should focus on how important is the effective and efficient judiciary, and how important is that all stakeholders understand the need for the judicial reforms. So this is how all these ideas have to be brought in this answer. Okay, so I discussed what are the essential components of this answer. So let us put it in the forms of answer format or in the answer format. Fine. So what I told you, don't start immediately with the judicial activism. Explain the importance of judiciary, importance of justice, and then connect the dots. Fine. So this statement somehow is linked to the credibility of judiciary, and most of the times when we write answers on judicial crisis, corruption, or any sort of issues related, problematic issues related to judiciary, so normally you can quote a phrase that a Caesar's wife should be above the suspicion. Okay, so I will start this answer with this phrase: Caesar's wife should be above suspicion. Fine. So what does it show? That the constitutional institutions should work in a manner that nobody points a finger towards them. You can start. And then this is related to the judiciary, overreach, credibility, and I have to write about the importance. So from where will I start? I will start with the view of Dicey. And according to Dicey, there is no better test of the excellence of the government than the state of functioning of its judicial system. Fine. So this is how so much the quality of good life depends upon good governance, and the good governance depends upon the efficient functioning of the judicial system. What is the purpose? Why I have brought this quote here? I have brought this quote here so that we can discuss judicial activism, judicial overreach, and credibility of judiciary in a perspective. And remember, this quote is used number of times whenever we explain or evaluate the functioning of judiciary. Fine. Now, after this, in your copies, you can write that the statement of Dicey shows how critical is the efficient functioning of judicial system to ensure good governance. You can also write that the recent reports and the studies show the direct link between the faster economic growth and the efficient judicial system. So judicial system is not about the dispute resolution only. It also acts as a factor, a critical factor in determining the country's growth and development trajectory. Okay. Now after that we will come specifically to the type of the institution which is created under the constitution. Okay, so in the next paragraph you can mention that Indian constitution creates the scope for an activist judiciary. You can quote Pandit Nehru that according to Pandit Nehru, judiciary will not be a passive judiciary, rather an active participant in India's social revolution. Okay, so this is how I have explained the importance of judiciary. Fine. Now I will come directly to judicial activism. Okay, and I will link it with the global trend. Fine. So judicial activism can be considered as, right inverted commas, new normal. Judicial activism was once considered as indecent, but as the former Justice P.N. Bhagwati suggests that gone are the days when it was considered indecent for the judges to make law. So judicial activism is a global trend with the growth of consciousness about the human rights and the rising aspirations of the people towards good governance. Okay. So in this paragraph what I have done, I have explained the importance and then I will explain the meaning. Fine. So judicial activism is ordinarily understood as a scenario where judiciary enters into the domain of the other two branches of government. For example, in the task of executive or in the task of legislature. And then to explain, I need to explain it further. So if we go by the traditional theory of the separation of powers, judicial activism may not be considered right from an orthodox point of view. However, Indian Constitution is a transformative constitution. Indian experiment is very different from the other countries, and judicial activism in India does enjoy enough legitimacy in the eyes of the people. In present time, judicial activism is not seen as a negative interference in the task of the other two branches of government, but a positive intervention on the behalf of positive intervention by the judiciary on behalf of the weaker sections of the society. The institutionalization of PIL is a case in a point. Even if we look into the Directive Principles, Article 39A, it is expected out of Indian state to provide access to justice and free legal aid. So what I am trying to, when I am writing these lines, what I am trying to communicate to the examiner, I am trying to communicate my in-depth understanding of the entire idea. Now in the next paragraph, what will I explain? I will go for a brief historical overview of judicial activism in India. Okay, so in India, the phase of judicial activism can be traced to Keshwanand Bharti judgment. Supreme Court has given the doctrine of basic structure and thus restricted the Parliament's power to amend the constitution by or in a way that takes away the fundamentals of the constitution. And thus judiciary ensured the rule of law in the country and prevented the country sliding into the direction of dictatorship. In the next paragraph, once judiciary has instituted PIL under the judges like Justice Bhagwati and Krishna Iyer, judicial activism had moved in a direction towards strengthening the rights of the weak and vulnerable. Judicial activism in India has filled the vacuum which has arisen because of the coalition government and political instability. You can here quote Bhikhu Parekh, who says that India became a classical example of judicial co-governance. Okay. Now, next what I will do, I will have to come to the question and I have to link judicial activism with judicial overreach. So, overreach is a negative term. So, I will create a background so that I can go for a transition of my ideas from what I have explained up till now, now to this concepts. So what happens is that when students write their answers, the answers appear disjointed. They don't appear in a flow. Fine, because they somehow they ignore the importance of these ideas, how you will move, like gradually explaining the judicial activism. I should not be abruptly start explaining judicial overreach. This transition has to be smooth. Fine. So what I will do in the next paragraph, I will not cut the entire link and I will link with judicial activism and I will move into the judicial overreach. So what I will do, what I can say that judicial activism in India has certainly proved to be a blessing in disguise, filling the vacuum whenever there was a gap of governance. But judicial activism is not free from its criticisms. At times, Supreme Court's actions have been criticized as judicial overreach. Okay, so now I have come to this point of overreach. Now, what is my challenge? How to explain judicial overreach. So, the next paragraph will be judicial overreach. Now, how will I explain judicial overreach? So, judicial overreach can be explained only in association with judicial activism. So, what I will write that judicial activism and judicial overreach can be understood in the context that today judicial activism has generated a consent in its favor. However, there are certain actions of the judiciary which are unable to generate the consent in their favor. Such actions are called as overreach. The actions or the decisions of judiciary which are considered as right by the people qualify to be known as judicial activism, whereas the decisions which are considered as undesirable, it is believed that judiciary has crossed its limit, judiciary's action was undesirable, judiciary should not have crossed this Lakshman Rekha, then we use this term overreach. Fine, but you have to clarify that which action is judicial activism, which action is judicial overreach is a highly subjective phenomena, because a same action of the judiciary may be considered as an activism by some and as an overreach by the other. So it is quite subjective and it will vary from person to person. And substantiate your example. For example, those who wanted that there should be the interstate river linking project, they have upheld the Supreme Court's direction to the government to start work on interlinking project. But many people believe that it is an example of judicial overreach. Judiciary does not have enough competence to address the complicated policy matters, and the interlinking project may cause degradation to the environment and may result into the displacement of large section of the society. Similarly, certain sections appreciated Supreme Court's intervention in 2G spectrum case, but when Supreme Court directed that for distribution of the natural resources only auction is the right approach, this is considered as overreach. Fine. So now no more need to explain it further. This much is enough. Okay. So now I will come to the next part of this question. The next part of this question is whether Supreme Court is passing through the crisis of credibility. Fine. The crisis of credibility. And for that only I have given this statement: Caesar's wife should be above suspicion. And since it is a different theme, what you will have to do, you have to write from a different paragraph. Don't mix up the paragraphs. Okay, so now I will discuss the crisis of credibility. You can note down one quote on the crisis of credibility. If you remember, it is fine, otherwise you ignore. But I have come across one quotation on the crisis of credibility by a former judge of Supreme Court of USA. You can utilize it. Okay, so you can note it down. I am dictating: Chief Justice Warren E. Burger So for this part, crisis of credibility, if required, you can use this statement which is given by former Chief Justice of USA, Warren E. Burger. Okay, and the statement is, you can first write it down, then I will also write on the board. Fine. So write it down. A sense of confidence in the court is essential to maintain the fabric of liberty. Fine. So the quote is, a sense of confidence in the court is essential to maintain the fabric of liberty. So you should understand the depth of this fabric of liberty. Fine. So no rational person will ever be willing to lose liberty or to live in the state of slavery or to go for autocracy, and to ensure that the government does not behave in an autocratic manner and the liberties of the people is protected. What is needed is the confidence. Fine. So confidence, especially perceptions, matter a lot. Perception will play a big role, and if this perception comes that the judicial system is corrupt, it will result into the collapse of the order, peace and harmony. And it is for this reason it is said that if the lamp of justice goes, we cannot imagine the amount of darkness. Okay, so there are a lot of quotes which you can use in this answer. Fine. So let us deal with this part of the question. Fine. So what you will write, as suggested by Warren Burger, that the confidence in judiciary is a prerequisite for the liberty, and as it is often quoted that once the lamp of justice goes, it will be difficult to imagine the amount of darkness. Itself shows that how important it is that people should have the confidence in the judicial system. Okay. Then you link it in the next paragraph, you link it with Indian situation. Okay. So you can say that in recent times there has been an observation by political scholars as well as public intellectuals that Indian judiciary is passing through the crisis of credibility or the crisis of legitimacy. Okay, and you can give reference to certain scholars and their work. Okay, so you can, to substantiate your point of view, you can give reference to certain works. For example, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, in his article which references you can give? You can give reference of Pratap Bhanu Mehta in his article Supreme Court Diminished published in Indian Express. Highlight that the Supreme Court is losing, right? Highlight that the Supreme Court is losing its credibility because of, he gives three reasons. First, the quality of judgments. Second, inconsistency of its opinion. Third, inability to tackle corruption. Okay, comma, and he writes that in a way judiciary has abdicated. Judiciary has abdicated its constitutional responsibility. Okay. Similarly, you can also quote another scholar, A.K. Prasanna, in his article in EPW, Economic and Political Weekly, titled A Decade of Decay, highlight the growing crisis of credibility in judiciary. Next, recently there has been a book co-authored by the scholars so I don't remember the name of scholars, but you can note it down and from the net you can just see. Similarly, the book titled Supreme but Not Infallible gives an overview of the functioning of the Supreme Court in India. Okay, so these are some scholarly works which you can quote to substantiate your answer. So let me see the title of the authors. Supreme this is a book edited by B.N. Kirpal. B.N. Kirpal, Ashok Desai, and Gopal Subramaniam. B.N. Kirpal, Ashok Desai, you can write Raju Ramachandran. They all have contributed essays in this particular book. Fine. So why I am giving this? Because this will give an academic touch to our answer, and this will also show our intellectual curiosity in knowing the recent works rather than just repeating the old works. You can give a fresh look to your answer. Okay. Now, it's not that you have to just write the opinions. You also have to show that you have an ability to analyze, you have an ability to think, and how you in particular is going to think about the crisis of credibility. So as while doing the structure, I told you that the crisis, to understand the crisis of credibility, we can take certain parameters for the objective assessment or the objective evaluation of the Supreme Court's situation. Okay, fine. So what you can write further, that in order to understand the crisis of credibility, we can formulate certain criteria for the objective evaluation. Fine. Now, what is the criteria? The criteria can be to what extent, you can note it down, what will be the criteria? To what extent the decisions of judiciary appear to be free from the influence and power of executive. To what extent the decisions of Supreme Court appear to be neutral, rational, in accordance to the constitutional morality rather than ideological or biased. Next, the efficiency in terms of the pendency. Next is accessibility to the common man, the state of transparency and accountability. So these are certain criteria that can be adopted for objective assessment of the Supreme Court's crisis of credibility. Okay, so if you will just skip the criteria and you will write, then it will appear you are not a person who thinks, who analyze it. Okay, so what I will do, write it down. Right, the first criteria of the credibility is how much independent the judiciary is from the political influence. In this context, there has been certain criticisms of Supreme Court, and it has been alleged, don't write it has been alleged that in the last few years there is a sort of collusion, collusion, collusion developed between the judiciary and the government. Fine? Right? Once the majority government is back in power, it has started asserting itself. There was a conflict between judiciary and executive in the beginning, for example, with respect to the amendment or 99th amendment related to NJAC. Then government tried to create or tried to put the obstacles in the path of appointment systems by not cooperating on the matter of memorandum of procedure. Fine, but the scenario has changed. So, however, it is held that the Supreme Court and the government has somehow found a modus vivendi, some workable mechanism, modus vivendi, and presently Supreme Court or the judiciary is not free from the government's influence. Those who have such opinion, they point towards the certain cases. For example, the case related to Justice Loya, the case where judiciary has declined to grant the order for review petition to Romila Thapar with respect to the certain members of civil society alleged as urban Naxals. Even in case of the migrant labor issue, the Rafale issue, it has been alleged that the approach of Supreme Court has not been balanced or neutral. It has been too much tilted towards the government. Okay. Now we will take the second issue, whether the judgments are ideological or judgments are rational. Fine. So in present time, certain judgments, for example, Supreme Court's judgment with respect to national anthem, where or Ayodhya verdict is seen by certain sections of the society more ideological and thus rational, and thus substantiating that the court may be supreme but not infallible. Next criteria is with respect to the pendency. So you can always write that it is said that justice delayed is justice denied, and Indian judicial system is notorious for the extreme pendency, and around 3 crore cases are pending in the different courts. Next, transparency and accountability. So according to the Transparency International, the subordinate judiciary in India is highly corrupt, and it is said that the corruption is now moving ahead even in higher judiciary. There have been allegations of the corruption and misconduct even against the judges of Supreme Court and High Court. For example, employment, for example, Provident Fund case, for example, first time in the history there has been an allegation against the CJI in context of sexual harassment, and many people believe that the way judiciary has dealt with the entire case goes against the basic principles of natural justice. Okay. Right now, these are enough examples, but always say that you are not writing it, it is alleged that. Okay, fine. So, right, thus the above examples show that the Supreme Court has been losing the credibility which it enjoyed once. Okay, now you have substantiated your point of view, but you cannot have a very pessimistic outlook. So we will write that it is true that there have been certain occasions, for example, Rafale deal, for example, with respect to the granting bail in Shaheen Bagh protest, or in case of Bhima Koregaon incident, but it does not mean that there is nothing to celebrate. So Supreme Court in recent years has also given some remarkable judgments strengthening the rights of the weaker sections. You can give example of, for example, Nalsa judgment protecting the rights of transgender, Navtej Singh Johar case decriminalizing homosexuality, the Sabrimala judgment allowing the women enter into the temple, and declaring triple talaq as constitutionally void. Okay, and then we will, how should we end this answer? So we will end this answer on what should have been done. So in the end we can say that, or a sort of summing up of the answer, that independent judiciary, efficient and effective, is a sine qua non of democracy, and it is essential that all those who are in power and all constitutional authorities, they should adhere to the constitutional morality. We should not ignore that if persons in power do not adhere to the constitutional morality, it will result into the collapse of the entire experiment known as India. Okay, so this is how we can finish this answer. Now, let me take the next question. The next question is, in your answer, if you are left with the time, you can always say that some of the reforms should be taken at earliest. For example, the bringing transparency and accountability, the act like Judicial Standard and Accountability Act should be brought next. Government and all stakeholders should take steps for the faster delivery of justice and to make justice accessible to the all sections of the society. So you can suggest certain reforms. You can also have a look on the model answer. Now the third question is, explain the phenomena of decline of parliament. Evaluate the working of parliamentary democracy and its challenges. The question is, explain the phenomena of the decline of parliament. Next is, evaluate the working of parliamentary democracy. Evaluate the working of parliamentary democracy and its challenges. What are the challenges parliamentary democracy face? Okay. So sometimes you should also bring the methodology. There is a scope that you can add methodology in your answers. Okay, how to use methodology. So here what we are studying? Here we are studying the decline of parliament. Fine. Now, out of the methods of comparative politics, which method we can use for this study? So the method that we can use for analyzing this can be the institutional or neo-institutional approach. So sometimes you try to experiment writing of answers, each answer in a different way. Okay, it should not be monotonous. Don't follow one pattern. In comparative government and politics, sometimes we can bring the methodology also. Okay, and how can we bring the methodology? I will just tell you. Doesn't work. Okay, then evaluate the working of parliamentary democracy. Here I will bring the systems approach. Fine, and its challenges. Fine. So how will I start this? Should I start decline of parliament means this? No. I will start first with parliamentary democracy. Then I will write about the importance of parliament as an institution. So again, I will not write a disjointed answer. I will write in a flow. So first of all, I will write about the parliamentary democracy and its virtues and why India has adopted the parliamentary democracy over the presidential system. Okay. Second, the importance of parliament in this setup. Then I will write something on the functions of parliament. Then I will write the state of the functioning of parliamentary democracy, where I will put forward the idea of the decline, and I will explain the decline and its causes, and then I will write a way forward. I hope you agree with my approach. And sometimes students are concerned, I have to quote a thinker or what, is it essential? See, understand that in answer writing there is no hard and fast rule. The only challenge is you have to make your answer look interesting. Okay, so the challenge is it should appear interesting to the person who is reading your answer. That is a challenge. So sometimes you can write the analysis, sometimes you can bring the methodology, sometimes you can link the Indian section answer with the political theory. So think think a lot. Bring out the ideas from your mind. So if you are a good thinker, you can write an answer. Fine. So it's all about influencing others. You do the same thing in interview also. You influence the interview board. Here you have to influence the examiner. Think about all those things which can appeal to somebody. Don't go for any straight jacket formula. Don't follow anybody. Follow your heart. Follow your mind. Fine. Don't follow the pattern suggested by any topper. You should be the leader. You should reflect your personality in your answer. You should behave like a leader. Have confidence in yourself. Have confidence have conviction in your arguments. Develop ability to logically analyze things. Don't be lakir ka fakir. Okay? Bring a fresh perspective. Bring a fresh vision. Something new. Experiment. Fine? So now, this is how we can go ahead with that answer. So I am writing the question again. Explain the phenomena of the decline of parliament. First thing. Second thing is evaluate the functioning of parliamentary democracy. third thing, challenges in India. And you know that maybe in your notes you can just check which scholars I have often quoted. For the study of Parliament, you can quote this prominent personality, Morris Jones. You can quote Shankar and Rodericks. Fine. You can quote Devesh Kapoor and Pratap Bhanu Mehta. Fine. You check the title of their book, I think Indian Parliament. This is also something, and this is Rethinking Public Institutions in India, Oxford publication. I will tell because I know you will not check it, so let me tell you the title of the book. Yeah, the exact title of the book is, Shankar and Roderick's book is, where should I write? The Indian Parliament. The Indian Parliament, a democracy at work. What short notes you should make out of the notes? Remember the name of these books: Rethinking Public Institutions, and this is also, I think, which publication? Oxford publication, and Morris Jones book on Parliament. Parliament in India, and the publication, I don't know the publication. Fine. So the book is Parliament in India. And then you can even write about Professor M.P. Singh, his textbook, M.P. Singh and Himanshu Rai, Indian Political System. Right? So these are the books. Morris Jones, the first academic work, Indian Parliament. Shankar and Roderick's work, The Indian Parliament, A Democracy at Work. Devesh Kapoor, Pratap Bhanu Mehta's book, Rethinking Public Institutions, and ideas of Professor M.P. Singh. Okay, so the question is, explain the phenomena of decline of Parliament. First thing. Second thing is, evaluate the working of parliamentary democracy. Third thing, the challenges. Right? So sometimes Indian polity answers can also be started with, I am giving you different ideas: Constituent Assembly debates, you can bring methodologies, you can bring theory. So let us see what we can use, which resource, which spice we will use to build this answer. Fine. So you can note it down. Right. So there was a debate in the Constituent Assembly with respect to the form of government. Some sections favored the presidential system, but ultimately the matter got settled in favor of the parliamentary democracy. One of the major supporter of parliamentary democracy was Pandit Nehru. Okay. The reason for choosing the parliamentary democracy in India were: first, the experience under the colonial rule; second, the diversity of the country, because in a parliamentary system there is a collegiate executive rather than one man show. Hence, the different sections and ideological persons with different ideological orientations could get a seat in the executive, and most importantly, the virtue of the parliamentary system is the day-to-day accountability in comparison to the parliamentary form of, in comparison to presidential form of government. Okay, so you can write that we have adopted the parliamentary system. However, there were apprehensions about the prospects of the success of parliamentary democracy in India, because, as suggested by Professor Maurice Jones in his book Indian Parliament, point number 1, it is an imported institution and not an indigenous institution. And he feared the diversity in India, and maybe in the coming times he expected that the social cleavages are bound to grow and the parliamentary democracy in India will become quite complicated in nature. Okay. Then you can write, however, in the initial decades, because of Pandit Nehru's commitment to democracy and his approach to work with consensus, resulted into a considerable success for the parliamentary democracy. The Congress system also provided the much needed stability which is otherwise missing in a parliamentary system. Okay, so this much introduction is needed. Now I said I will experiment here with the methodology. Fine. So what you can write that, right, under the influence of behavioral revolution, the political scientists have shifted their attention from the study of institutions to the study of processes. However, later on, it was realized that the study of institutions is the vital part of political science. This resulted into the evolution of a new approach known as neo-institutionalism. This has again generated the interest in the research of the political institutions. We can apply the institutional oblique neo-institutional approach as well as the systems and structural functional approach to analyze the working of Indian Parliament. Okay. Now, what we say, we have to come into the decline. Okay. Then you can say that in recent years, scholars like Pratap Bhanu Mehta, Devesh Kapoor, in their edited book Rethinking Public Institutions in India, have highlighted the decline of the various institutions of parliamentary democracy. And then you write the centrality of Parliament. Parliament is the center of gravity in a country with a parliamentary form of government. And as found in various studies, for example, by World Bank, Indian Parliament has suffered the greatest amount of decline in comparison to any other institution. Okay, and then you can mention that the World Bank has proposed certain parameters to evaluate the effectiveness of Parliament as an institution. This includes cost to the country, it includes the effectiveness, the quality of the laws, ability to enforce the laws, and sustainability. Sustainability of the institution means how much credibility that institution has in the eyes of the people. Unfortunately, the record of Indian Parliament on these parameters is not very encouraging. We have seen a sort of a lawlessness in the country. For example, in context of the movement or agitation to introduce Lokpal, where civil society tried to assert itself, getting disappointed with the way Parliament has functioned. Okay, now in the next paragraph, I will explain the decline of Parliament. Fine. Thus, the decline of Parliament can be seen in terms of decline of the legitimacy and the respect which the parliamentarians have enjoyed. Okay, and the decline of Parliament has been even accepted by the former speaker and an acclaimed political personality, Somnath Chatterjee. Okay. Now, some of the reasons of the decline is point number 1, as suggested by Shankar and Rodrigues, the growth of social cleavages in the country. The growth of social cleavages, as democracy is deepening, social cleavages have increased. These social cleavages has resulted into the growth of coalition politics. The coalition politics has promoted the problem of defections, horse trading, and the criminalization of politics. The presence of the criminals. Unfortunately, if we take the data of the present Lok Sabha, around, as per ADR's report, more than 40% of the members have been alleged to have a criminal background. So, the way parliamentarians behave in the parliament, the quality of debates, the parliament doesn't work to its optimal capacity. There have been allegations against the institution of a speaker, the problem of defection, politicization of the institution of a speaker, as well as the poor functioning of the committee system is some of the examples of this particular decline. Okay, and now evaluate the working of parliamentary democracy. Just link it. When the supreme institution and the central of gravity declines, we automatically can understand the parliamentary democracy is bound to suffer. The scholars like Christophe Jeffrey Lott have pointed that there is a growth of majoritarianism in the country and the democracy is turning into a sort of mobocracy. Christophe Jeffrey Lott also points towards the fact that in the absence of the essential electoral reforms, the people in India are not under the rule of law, they are under the rule of money. The increasing criminalization and the increasing role of the money power also put a question mark on the future of the parliamentary democracy in India. Fine. So you can say that these things do not augur well for the future of democracy. Certain scholars like Professor Dipankar Gupta has held that it is high time we should think about experimenting with some form of direct democracy even at the national level. Fine. And then you can say that, however, it is essential to restore the confidence of the people in the institution of parliament. And to restore the confidence of the people, it is important that electoral reforms take place that check the entry of the criminals and the role of money in the political system. You can also suggest that there should be enough arrangement for the capacity building of the parliamentarians, as because of globalization and increasing responsibilities of the state, the task of legislation has become too complicated. So without adequate training and capacity building, MPs will not be able to perform their functions. It is also essential that there should be some system that motivates members of parliament for their contribution in the parliamentary committees. The government also needs to support the functioning of parliament and to restore the credibility. You can also point towards the role of media. Media also needs to put forward the positive contribution of the parliament in India. Fine. In the end, you can say we have to arrest the institutional decline. Otherwise, it is difficult to protect the democracy in India, and there is a possibility that the entire idea of India or experiment may not work. Okay, so I hope you have understood. This much is enough for today. Tomorrow I will take up the other questions, and I have also made one video on those who have already subscribed in the October. If they want to write some additional tests, they can do so by paying some marginal amount. And the next thing is, I am going to start the crash course from now onwards. I will first finish these questions, and the next thing is, I am also planning to have a live chat after a discussion, but it will take time to tell you the timings and all. So maybe once in a week we will have a live chat where you can ask your doubts, because we are unable to hold the offline classes. Fine. So in the next discussion I will take up the other questions. Thank you.